There are things that happen inside the walls of the British royal family that the public never gets to hear about right away. Not because they are being hidden, not because someone is trying to keep a secret, but simply because the people involved prefer to let life move quietly, without cameras pointed at every doorway and every handshake. Lady Louise Windsor has lived her entire life that way. She grew up with one of the most recognizable surnames in the world, and yet she chose, at every turn, to remain just outside the frame. She went to university. She studied English literature. She worked a shift in a canteen like any other student. She drove carriages at horse shows and performed on stage in student plays and joined the officers' training corps, all without anyone from the palace press office making a formal announcement. And then, quietly again, she graduated. And now, as the dust settles on that chapter of her life, a story has begun to surface. A story about a property, a gift, and two men who clearly decided that this young woman deserved something meaningful as she stepped into whatever comes next. The story involves Prince William, the man who will one day be king. It involves Lord Ivar Mountbatten, the aristocrat who has known Louise since before she could speak. And it involves a place called Wren's Nest, a name that carries with it the kind of warmth and intimacy that royal residences rarely have. This is that story. To understand why this moment matters so much, you have to go back to the beginning, not just to Louise's childhood, but to the circumstances of her birth itself, because those circumstances shaped everything that came after. Lady Louise Alice Elizabeth Mary Mountbatten Windsor was born on the 8th of November 2003, and from the very first hours of her life, things were complicated. She arrived 4 weeks prematurely, and the birth happened suddenly without warning at Frimley Park Hospital in Surrey. Her father, Prince Edward, was not there. He was many miles away in Mauritius when it happened, and that detail alone tells you something about the kind of arrival Louise had: unexpected, urgent, and surrounded by uncertainty. The early weeks were difficult. She was small and fragile, and there were real concerns about her health. But she made it through. And the family that gathered around her in those early days was determined to give her something that not every royal child gets: a childhood built around privacy, normalcy, and genuine choice. Wikipedia +2. Her parents, Prince Edward and Sophie, made a decision early on that Louise would not be pushed into public life before she was ready. They did not want her photographed at every turn. They did not want her name in the newspapers every weekend. They wanted her to grow up as close to an ordinary child as was possible given who her father was and who her grandmother was. And to a remarkable degree, they succeeded. Louise went to local schools, she made friends who were not royals, and she learned to navigate the world without a security team trailing her every move. Her godparents included Lady Sarah Chatto and Lord Ivar Mountbatten, and Lord Ivar in particular became a consistent and meaningful presence in her life. He was not just a name on a baptism certificate. He was a real person who texted her, who kept in touch, who watched her grow from a premature baby into a young woman with her own views and her own ambitions. He is a close friend of Prince Edward and Sophie, and the two families have woven themselves together over the decades in a way that goes beyond formal royal connection. Sophie often comes to stay at Ivar's home in Devon, and the Edinburghs and the Mountbattens have spent winters together, shared meals, and built the kind of easy friendship that royal life, with all its protocol and ceremony, doesn't always allow. Wikipedia +2. Lord Ivar Mountbatten himself is a fascinating figure. He is a second cousin of King Charles III and carries a name that echoes through the deepest chapters of British royal history. He became the first member of the extended royal family to be openly in a same-sex relationship, and in 2018 became the first to have a same-sex wedding, marrying airline cabin services director James Coyle. His life has been one of quiet courage, the kind that doesn't involve speeches or protests, but simply the willingness to live honestly regardless of what tradition might have expected. He is a farmer, geologist, businessman, and reality television personality, and he approaches all of it with a warmth and directness that those who know him describe as completely genuine. When he talks about Louise, the affection is obvious. Lady Louise and I text a lot, but that's about it. "Young people are always very busy," he once said, laughing, and in that small sentence you can hear the easy familiarity of a real relationship, not a ceremonial one. Wikipedia +3. Louise's connection to Prince William is perhaps less immediately obvious, but it is no less real. William is her cousin, the son of her late Uncle King Charles's predecessor in waiting, and the two share not just bloodline but a particular understanding of what it means to grow up royal without fully choosing it. William knows what it is to have your entire life mapped out by birth. He knows what it means to carry a name that people recognize before they know anything else about you. And he has, by all accounts, been quietly supportive of the younger generation of royals who are trying to find their own way. His relationship with Louise is not the kind that generates tabloid headlines, but those who are close to the family have noted that he holds real affection for her, the kind of affection that expresses itself in gestures rather than grand statements. Which brings us to Wren's nest. Reports began circulating in early 2026 that Prince William and Lord Ivar Mountbatten had together arranged for Lady Louise to receive the property known as Wren's nest, reportedly as a gift tied to her transition out of university life and into whatever chapter comes next. The details of the property, as they have emerged through various accounts, paint a picture of a place that feels entirely right for someone like Louise. Not grand in the way that royal estates are typically grand, not the kind of property that comes with a full staff and a visitor entrance and an entry in the guidebooks. Instead, Wren's nest is described as something more intimate, a retreat. A place where someone can close the door and simply be, without any obligation to perform or present or appear. In a family where even a quiet cup of tea can become a public moment, a property like that is not a small gift. It is an extraordinary one. The timing of the gift, if the reports are accurate, is significant. Louise has recently graduated from the University of St. Andrews, completing a degree in English and stepping out of the protective rhythm of student life. She will now take a gap year to work, volunteer, and travel, with potential career interests in the military, diplomacy, or law. That transition, from the relative shelter of university into the open question of what comes next, is a significant one for anyone. For a young woman who has spent her whole life carefully managing the boundary between her private self and her public identity, it is even more significant. And to receive, in the middle of that transition, something as grounding as a home, a place that belongs to her, that she did not earn through duty or performance but was simply given out of love, is the kind of thing that changes how you feel about the ground beneath your feet. Yahoo! Yahoo! Lady Louise has built a reputation as one of the most down-to-earth royals of her generation. During her time at St. Andrews, she did not live behind palace walls or conduct herself with the self-consciousness of someone who knows they are being watched. Reports that she worked in a university canteen while studying reinforced her reputation as someone who preferred ordinary experience over royal privilege. She also played Sir Oliver Surface in the Comedy School for Scandal, Lady Caversham in Oscar Wilde's An Ideal Husband, and starred in a student-written play called Dragon Fever. She joined the university's Officers Training Corps as a cadet, reflecting a long-standing interest in military service. And she continued the carriage driving that she first took up in honor of her late grandfather, Prince Philip, competing at the Royal Windsor Horse Show and earning real recognition for her skill rather than simply her surname. All of these things paint a picture of a young woman who is genuinely trying to build something real, not a royal image, but a life. Fashion times +3. That is precisely what makes the Wren's Nest story so resonant, because what William and Lord Ivar appear to have understood is that what Louise needs at this point in her life is not a title or a platform or an official role. What she needs is something solid to come home to, something that exists outside the machinery of the institution, something that says, you are loved for who you are, not for what you represent. In a family where gifts are often tied to duty, where a royal residence comes with the weight of history and the expectation of public access, to give someone a place that is simply theirs is a profound act of understanding. The broader context of Louise's life makes this gesture even more layered. She is currently 17th in line to the throne, a position that places her well outside the immediate circle of working royals, but still inside the extended family with all the weight that carries. She has not taken a princess title, choosing instead to go by Lady Louise Windsor, a decision that reflects the same orientation toward ordinary life that has defined everything else she has done. She attended carriage-driving events not as a dignitary but as a competitor. She showed up to horse shows as a worker, directing operations alongside volunteers half her age. She studied and performed and joined the corps not because anyone asked her to, but because those were the things she wanted to do. Wikipedia. And now she stands at a crossroads that every 22-year-old eventually faces, made more complex by the fact that her crossroads happens to be watched, even at a distance, by a country that carries a complicated relationship with the institution her family represents. The question of what Lady Louise Windsor becomes next is genuinely open. Career interests that have been reported include the military, diplomacy, and law, and all three paths would suit someone with her combination of intellectual rigor and practical mindedness. She has the grades from one of the most academically demanding universities in the world. She has military experience from the OTC. She has spent her entire life watching how institutions work from the inside, which is its own form of education. Yahoo! What Wren's nest gives her, in the middle of all that uncertainty, is an anchor. A place that will be there regardless of which path she chooses. Whether she goes into the army or reads for the bar or joins a diplomatic mission or does something no one has yet anticipated, there will be a home waiting for her. A home given by two people who represent, in very different ways, the best of what the royal world can produce when it is not performing for an audience. Lord Ivar, who found the courage to live his truth in a world that would have preferred he kept quiet, and Prince William, who grew up carrying more weight than almost anyone could imagine and chose, at his best, to use whatever influence he had to protect the people he loves. There is something deeply moving about the image of those two men deciding together that Louise deserved this. That this young woman, who has asked so little and given so quietly, who studied in Scotland and worked in a canteen and drove carriages and acted in plays and kept herself out of the headlines by sheer force of character, that she deserved a place of her own. A nest in the truest sense of the word. Somewhere safe. Somewhere warm. Somewhere that belongs to no one else. The University of St. Andrews is a special place for the royal family, and Louise graduating from the same university where William and Kate first fell in love adds another layer of tenderness to this whole story. There is a continuity there, a sense that the places which have sheltered the family at key moments have a habit of returning. William met the woman he would spend his life with in those stone corridors, and now his younger cousin has walked out of those same corridors into a future that, thanks in part to him, has a little more warmth in it than it might otherwise have had. Marie Claire. The British monarchy has spent decades trying to convince the public that it is capable of change, that it can move with the times without losing what is essential about it, that the people inside it are real human beings with real feelings and real relationships, not simply figures in a pageant. Sometimes those efforts feel hollow. Sometimes the gestures feel calculated, designed for cameras and approval ratings rather than genuine feeling. But sometimes, not often, but sometimes something happens that feels entirely unscripted. A godfather texting his goddaughter about nothing in particular. A prince and an aristocrat sitting down together and deciding to give a young woman something solid to stand on. A property with a quiet name being handed to someone who has earned rest without ever asking for it. That is what Wren's nest appears to be. Not a statement, not a headline, just a home. And for Lady Louise Windsor, who has spent 22 years building a life on her own terms inside one of the most scrutinized families in the world, that is everything.